This is a report on the geomagnetic storm that's going on right now. The source of this activity are these recent coronal mass ejections that you see here imaged in the SOHO C3 imager, that being the largest of the ejections. And I'm expecting tropical cyclones to associate with these ejections. But if you compare these to the events of the last cycle, these are actually fairly puny coronal mass ejections. And it was enough to cause a serious geomagnetic storm, primarily because of the fact that they sort of ganged together. This is the first we saw of it in the form of this spike in X-ray activity and higher frequency energy. That is M1, 2, 3, 4, M5 class, basically, as taken from the SOHO Celis SEM device. But this is not abnormal activity, even though we did see a fairly serious geomagnetic storm. This activity is expected for this part of the cycle. And this is actually something that I have been concerned about not seeing. I've been concerned because the X-ray activity has been very, very low, and the higher energy forms that are responsible for doing things like puffing up the Earth's atmosphere and troposphere have been absent. And so we have this situation where we have a very hot summer because there's not a lot of atmosphere to insulate the Earth from the sun's radiation, which is now starting to return. And so this is not necessarily a bad thing. This is something that I don't associate with earthquakes because it's not from a coronal hole. Now this is a geomagnetic disturbance that was associated with the arrival of this incident that under other circumstances might have been associated with a very, very serious seismic event. Now here you can see on the timeline that there was a 20 nanotesla swing in the Z component of the Earth's magnetic field. And this is a big swing. This scale is usually like 5 up here and 5 down here, and now it's adjusted for this swing. And it's pretty much normalized now, but there's still a possibility that when the proton density returns to normal, that we will see some sort of seismic adjustment if there is another geomagnetic swing like this. If we see another geomagnetic swing like this when this proton density is normalized, then we could see an earthquake. Now, technically in astrotometry, that is excluded when there is not a coronal hole that would indicate the inconsistency of the time-space translation of that physical space. And so I was questioning whether or not to do an earthquake forecast based on this coronal hole. I haven't done one yet. I am watching this particular area. And the most likely place for this is the region that has been experiencing this activity here south of the equator. And so I'm associating this activity right here with this activity. And I do think that we will see more large events in this area. I don't know if they will be over 6.5. It's definitely possible. I don't think it will be much over 6.8 if there is another one. Now this one was, I had forecast this event in my last forecast, but I haven't done a forecast for this particular hole, partially because of the coronal mass ejection. When the coronal mass ejection comes in, it disturbs the solar wind that is coming with the alternate energy pattern. And so it's this higher proton activity that actually, if you can imagine an internal pressure that increases, that prevents the movement of the matter. That's the way it's modeled with the core model three-dimensionally. The core weather model assumes that when the proton density goes up like this, that the pressure in between, basically in between the molecules, also goes up. And so it's less likely that there will be slippage during that period. And so that's the model. You can see here the total electron count has gone up. There's this red area here right now in Africa and India, and so these places are probably experiencing some pretty intense solar activity right now. This is not something that I'm concerned about at all. Like I said, I consider this to be auspicious, except for the possibility that we'll see the tail end of this solar wind lash in such a way after this returns to normal. And so this flare as an event is not a very serious flare. Now, there is a possibility that during the cycle, more towards the downside of the cycle, we will see these flares start to associate with seismic events on the button. The last time there was an obvious example of this was the quake in Sichuan. We saw the quakes in Sichuan timed almost perfectly with these X-ray spikes. But keep in mind, these are very, very different energy forms. They're different in frequency, they're very different in the effects, and the cumulative effects are very different. And so to differentiate this, to do the forecasts, you're going to have to pay attention to what I'm saying in these. And I appreciate the people who are trying to do that, but I don't appreciate the people who are ignoring my advice and are trying to take my ideas and run with them. There are a few people here on YouTube who are trying to do that are unfortunately getting a lot of attention. But you'll notice that their forecasts aren't following as well because they're not paying attention to the science behind it. And you can go to coreweather.com and sort of read about my earlier ideas. But what's there was not was not the dynamic that we have been experiencing for the past 3 years. I always look for a coronal hole that is associated with an active region, and that is how I gauge the forecasts. There will have to be an alternate method when the dynamics of the sun changes to accommodate this other pattern where we have these spikes and we see an earthquake associated right on the time with this. This is the most difficult one to forecast because we don't know when these active regions explode. This activity happens almost immediately. There's no waiting for a coronal mass ejection to travel to the Earth when we receive this energy. This energy is immediate, and these other forms that are causing the geomagnetic activity, they arrive much later. They travel much more slowly, and the speed that they travel is related to the amount of energy. And so this was not enough energy to cause an earthquake, and it would have to have been well up in this range right here, probably up in here, for there to have been a serious quake associated with it. I haven't gone in to look to see if there was a smaller quake associated with it, but this is not something that I usually look for to cause an earthquake during a cycle that is this low. The cycle is fairly weak. The activity that we're seeing is much less than what was forecast. And so this is, like I said, this is actually an auspicious thing. I consider this good. It wasn't really a danger. Having this up, the geomagnetic activity up this high, having this geomagnetic swing, this is the danger from a Carrington event or similar sort of event. When there is this sort of geomagnetic swing, it can really mess with the power grid. There have been scattered reports of power outages. The most serious seems to be in Toronto, and that seems to be the most likely to have corresponded with this event. But still, there's only about 500 people that are without power presently, so this is not something nearly as serious as what we saw back in the last cycle in 2001 to 2003. And so this is the concern, but this one wasn't big enough to be concerned about. and so it was Earth directed. Had it not been Earth directed, it wouldn't have caused this much disturbance. But as you can see, it normalized fairly quickly. And individually, it's hard to say how they are going to align with particular tropical cyclone formation. But there are going to be tropical cyclones forming. The ones that we've had recently, all very puny. We did see this typhoon Muifa that did reach Category 1. We've had a couple of other cyclones. We have Category 1 Typhoon Merbok and a tropical storm, Eugene. But these are all fairly small storms, and the reason is because these coronal mass ejections have been very weak. Now, the ones associated with this activity will be forming in the next few days. So we'll see additional tropical activity from the one that was near the equator. So there, if you look at the latitudes on these ejections, they're very telling about where these storms will form. And this one will be tropical. The one that's coming right at us here will definitely be tropical. That will definitely be tropical. This won't. This will be a northern storm. So the latitudes will associate, the latitudes of these storms will associate with the general latitudes of these ejections. As they combine, though, in the time space, we have this one right here that came on the 4th. They will interfere with each other, and so it's difficult to say what the overall impact of this on the tropical activity will be, other than it's going to increase. We're going to see generally more storm activity. Whether it will be organized into cyclones is unclear because of the interference between the forms, because they came in such quick succession, which is the reason that we saw this serious geomagnetic activity. There was also geomagnetic activity increase recorded here on the ground, but this was not associated with the earthquakes because of the higher energy forms. And so I am still watching for a southern earthquake. I don't think it is likely to be much above 6.5. And so I'm not going to do a formal watch for this disturbance. We're getting ready to see a very interesting dance. The planet Venus, that's this object right here, and the planet Mercury will be doing. Planet Mercury will be coming in here in retrograde, and they will appear to meet behind the sun. What's going to actually happen is Mercury is going to pass in front of the sun, and Venus is going to be behind it. And so when this happens, I'm expecting to see some very large coronal mass ejection activity from the reconnections of the inconsistencies of their orbits. And so relative to the Earth, their orbital inconsistencies cross when they conjunct the sun. And so we will see more coronal mass ejection activity, probably much larger than this when that event happens. And I've been watching that very closely. If this region is associated with that activity, which it very well may, we may see this area grow, turn into a sunspot, move over to the limb of the sun, and then a coronal mass ejection. And so that is basically the update for now. Again, I think that there's a possibility of an earthquake up to about 6.8 in magnitude. I try to only do forecasts when I'm fairly sure about it, and I've been sort of honing the technique to try to get out the false positives. And I appreciate the support, and if you're someone who's doing earthquake forecasting, please try to integrate this into your techniques. Thanks again.